A South African delegation led by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is currently at the World Economic Forum in Davos, that's in Switzerland. Their mission is to sell investment opportunities that exist here in South Africa, but experts are warning that the current energy crisis is not a good look for this country. Let's get you a sense of how this is all unfolding and bring in Professor Mark Swilling, who's co-director of the Center for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University. In fact, the Prof is live to us from Davos this morning. Great to see you, Prof. Thanks as always for making time to chat to us. So, to be fair, the forum acknowledges that the energy crisis is a problem not unique to South Africa. In fact, several other countries are dealing with this issue. But any well-informed investor will know that a big part of how we got here is because of our own making, mismanagement, to put it lightly. How is this complicating telling the South African story in 2023?
Well, as you said, everybody knows that South Africa is facing a pretty unprecedented energy crisis, and that it is true that many other countries are also going through that. And the reason all these countries are going through these crises is that there is a global energy transition underway. The investments in renewables now far exceeds the investments in coal and nuclear combined. And, the discussion here in Davos is very much about the new growth story. I was listening to Nick Stern last night. He was talking about the new growth story. All the big investors are focusing on investment in the energy transition, in nature-based solutions, in quite a fundamental transformation. So the question is South Africa going to wake up and catch up with that global trend? And that's really what I hope the South African delegation is going to experience, is where the world is at, and then ask, where is South Africa at?
It's an interesting question because it feels like we haven't even gotten to addressing that particular issue yet. So far, actually, we still find ourselves having to deal with discussions around simply fixing some of the things that have gone so horribly wrong over the past couple of years. You're currently in Davos. I mean, are you getting a sense that we're able to have these dual conversations at the very least? One, how do we ensure that the lights stay on because power stations, for instance, are not tripping? And two, how do we then get onto the trends globally and start speaking meaningfully about our transition?
Well, the South Africans are not here to have the first discussion. I mean, we're going to have that at home. On the second point is that, South Africa is actually pretty unique globally. We presented at COP27 the Just Energy Transition Partnership Investment Plan, which is a carefully crafted framework led by Daniel Manele, which was approved by Cabinet, presented to the Presidential Climate Commission, and I get questions around that all the time here. And so that is actually a good story that's come out of South Africa. And so everybody wants to know, well, it's a good story, but is there the political will and the financial resources and the institutional capacity to implement in light of the crisis that you're referring to? Yes, when we go home and hopefully long before we left, we should have been having these discussions about, how to address the current crisis.
You don't reckon there's a misalignment then that could ultimately have an adverse effect on this country? I mean, it doesn't really help that there are different conversations, for instance, that the president is having here at home and discussions that you're having there in Davos about essentially the same issue.
Yes, well, it is the same issue. And as I said at the beginning, there are many countries going through energy crises because we're in a gigantic, massive transition that is pretty much unstoppable. And the longer we continue to talk about only, that the only solution is fixing the machines when you can't really fix old machines that need to be closed down, when we continue to talk about coal and nuclear as solutions when the rest of the world is giving up on that, we need to really focus on the immediate task, which is to get as many solar and renewable energy plants going, empowering rooftop solar, PV for households and businesses, for enabling municipalities to procure renewables. We need to kind of unlock this exploding energy transition and ride it, work with it, rather than try and shut it down.
That's interesting. There is a sentiment from many in the commentariat suggesting in one way or the other that countries in the global south, perhaps emerging economies like us here in South Africa, are being made to carry disproportionately the weight of this global energy transition, especially because it makes more financial sense, they say, for us to continue using coal more than what essentially countries in the global north expect us to do. What's your response to that?
There's absolutely no empirical and scientific evidence to justify that claim, because renewables plus backup storage, including batteries and gas, is much cheaper than new coal, new nuclear. And so we just have to kind of break away from a religious discussion about technology to a financial and economic discussion about cost. And let cost drive the answer. It's got nothing to do with climate change anymore. We will look good in climate change terms, but it's really about energy security and how we make sure we invest in the cheapest, most and quickest solution. And that is really what we need to focus on. The discussion, for example, about car power shifts means we have to buy gas because we don't have gas. We have to pay for it in dollars. We know that prices of gas goes up and down, which means we're hooking our economy to a volatile resource in financial terms. That doesn't make sense. The sun and the wind we can predict, and we can transform it into energy, and it is. And those are our resources just as much as oil and gas are.
Sure.
So why not use them?
So this idea that we even have enough coal reserves, as far as you're concerned, doesn't make continuing with coal in this country justifiable?
No, let's focus on the money.
Right. Financially viable is what I was actually trying to say.
Yes. Yeah. So we may have a lot of coal, although the quality of that coal is declining. Which means you have to use more of it, which puts more CO2 emissions in the air. But put that aside, is it the cheapest solution? It's cheaper to build renewables now than actually keep an old coal-fired power station going. So let's just really focus on the money, because that's the scarce resource in our context, and say what's the best bang for the buck, and that's going to be, when you look at the numbers coldly, without any religious attachments to particular technologies, you'll come up with the answer. We will have coal for the next 20 years. I mean, we've invested in Medupi and Kusile. So it's not about switching off coal tomorrow and living in darkness like some politicians have suggested. It's not that at all. We're going to have coal. We're going to have gas. But we just need to also start looking at green hydrogen as well as renewable energy. And that is where the rest of the world is going. So let's just join the party, access the funding that's available for those technologies, and bring energy security back to the South African economy, because we can't continue like this.
Absolutely. I think no matter how you see what the solution looks like, everybody agrees that the current status is completely untenable. Very quickly, Prof, from your vantage point, given the worldview you have, what does the country need to do here at home today in order to ensure that we arrest the immediate issues as we plan ahead for this more grand transition in the future?
Well, firstly, we need to do whatever we can to improve the energy availability factor. But I'm not optimistic that we'll get that above 60%. So some of the machines need to be fixed, and others need to be closed down. But we can only do that when we have enough renewables on the grid. So over the next 2 years, hopefully we build 10 gigawatts of renewables plus storage. If we do that, load shedding will come to an end. And then we need to unlock the huge potential of rooftop PV, which will allow businesses and households to kind of generate their own solutions. Let the consumers who are suffering the consequences of the current crisis engage with small businesses to come up with their own solution. And that needs to be enabled, and it could release a lot of, Vietnam's a good example of that kind of strategy.
Right.
And municipalities need to be allowed to procure what they need directly.
All right, Professor Mark Swilling, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Great insights, yet another view around what the way forward looks like. But hopefully we'll be able to bring all these together and find a way forward, at least when you consider what's at stake. Professor Mark Swilling is with the Center for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University, also part of the South African delegation at the World Economic Forum in Davos.